12th of July, 2016. Taipei. A messy hotel room. A teapot boils in the corner. You've opened a cup of instant noodles, but your stomach won't cooperate. You pace, overthink. This is a trap. You never should have gotten involved. But it's not like this is your first time. You have done this before. Everything worked out back then. This should be fine too. Maybe some noise will calm your nerves. You sit down and turn on the local TV. CCTV footage from a bank ATM. It looks like a robbery, but an unusual one. The thieves aren't forcing the ATM open. They're just standing there, waiting for the cash to come out. Most people would find it strange, fascinating even. Not you. To you, this is the worst case scenario. They have you on camera. Now you're stuck with that and a bunch of people looking for you. Thankfully, they still don't know who you are. You glance back at the TV. Well, you're officially screwed. But you kind of expected it. For years, your organization outran its destiny, dodging investigators, international authorities, and bank security systems around the world, all thanks to a multi-tool weapon capable of penetrating the toughest defenses. But after years of getting away with it, you all became a bit too confident. Mistakes piled up, and maybe one more slip-up, your slip-up, is all it takes to uncover the final piece of a puzzle investigators have been assembling for years. This is the story of how the most sophisticated bank robbery ring was hunted down after 5 years on the run. And after that, there was no rollback. Around 2007, several banks in Eastern Europe and Russia started reporting something strange. Their ATMs were being robbed, but without any brute force. Criminals would simply approach the machine and have cash dispensed automatically. No credit cards, no PINs. The machine would magically release large sums of money without any human authorization. This was a rather bizarre incident. Until that moment, most ATM robbers weren't known for their subtlety. Their methods were, well, you can see for yourself. But it seemed that someone had managed to crack the code, and it made perfect sense. If you think about it, ATMs are just computers, and if you can breach a computer, you can technically breach an ATM. Security researchers began investigating and soon confirmed their suspicion. The ATMs had been hijacked by malware. This malware was capable of capturing pins and magnetic stripe data, instructing the machines to spit out cash. There was, however, one downside. The attack required an insider, such as an ATM technician or anyone else with a key to the machine. Surely this was better than blowing up an ATM or destroying half the building, but finding an insider was not always that easy. The first attacks around 2007 were primitive and rudimentary, but they showed that hijacking ATMs could be a profitable business if the process was a bit more streamlined. Fortunately, criminals did not have to wait long. 2 years later, a solution was presented. In 2010, cybersecurity researcher Barnaby Jack gave a presentation at a hacking conference about ATMs. Putting himself in the shoes of a robber, he tried to find a way to make machines dispense cash automatically. His goal was to prove that ATMs could be hijacked and that the banking industry needed stronger defenses. While examining the machines, he discovered they used 2 keys, one for dispensing cash and another for accessing the internal computer. The cash mechanism was very secure, but the second key had a vulnerability that allowed access to the ATM's motherboard. The motherboard is basically the brain of the ATM. If you can access it, then it's relatively easy to take control of the machine, which is exactly what Jack demonstrated. He loaded custom firmware onto the motherboard and rebooted the ATM, gaining full control, including the ability to dispense cash. But the true highlight of Barnaby's investigation came when he demonstrated that it was possible to remotely control an ATM. By bypassing authentication protocols, he could upload custom firmware and take full control. He called this technique jackpotting, and it was essentially a cheat code to make a lot of money in an easy and fast way. While we don't know if audience members were up-and-coming criminals or if Barnaby's findings reached the dark web somehow, one thing is clear: jackpotting was turned into a business. Speaking of cheat codes, The word on the street is that subscribing to this channel is a great way to hear more stories like Carbanak. We put a lot of effort and time into each one of these videos. Literal blood, tears, and sweat. But everybody's very happy with the production, including our editors. Right? Anyway, subscribe and like this video to help us create even greater content in the future. Thanks again, and now back to Carbanak. A Ukrainian bank contacted an antivirus company at the end of 2013 to investigate mysterious money losses. Cash was simply disappearing from their ATMs, but the bank could not pinpoint the cause. Right from the get-go, investigators thought that ATM computers were injected with malware, just as happened back in 2007. However, in-depth examinations of several ATMs returned no information. The malware in question was found only later, and not in the ATM itself, but in one of the connected systems. It was a type of banking malware called Carbanak. It was pretty common and not something people worried about, often used by script kiddies, nothing out of the ordinary. Still, if used correctly, Carbanak could steal sensitive data like credentials and passwords. This meant one thing. The problem was not the ATMs, it was the bank. Researchers started digging deeper and soon realized this was only the tip of a much bigger iceberg. At the start of 2013, an Eastern European gang began targeting Russian banks, and within just a few months, had breached 50 banks and 5 payment systems, stealing around $12 million. By the second quarter of 2013, the group was ramping up to bigger operations. They began developing more sophisticated malware and attacking international banks. Ukraine fit the pattern. It was simply part of the group's natural evolution. The modus operandi was pretty similar in all attacks. Threat actors would send an email to a bank employee with a document attached that exploited 2 vulnerabilities in Microsoft Office. Once clicked, the document would download malware into the computer. This malware was called Carbanak, and it would eventually give its name to the entire criminal organization. Carbanak used a specific configuration called a nunac, giving the malware its combined name. Carbanak was not just banking malware, but a full-featured backdoor. Think of it like one of those Swiss Army knives. Each tool has a specific purpose, for example, opening, cutting, or fixing. Carbanak is pretty much the same. Each tool serves a specific goal, and together they allow attackers to hide, move laterally, and spy. All of them combine for a specific goal, to take control of the banking systems. Once the malware is downloaded, the first tool of the knife opens up. Just like in a regular Swiss knife, the tools are grouped by their function, and in this case, one of the main utilities is stealth. The success of the malware highly depends on its ability to stay undetected, so it tries to, quite literally, become one with the machine. For example, it hides in legitimate processes, and even deletes part of itself to remove evidence. On top of that, it can hide its communication with attackers by disguising it as normal web browsing. These elements make it very hard to detect once users download the malware. Then, Carbanak displays its second tool, movement. The malware needs to understand the ins and outs of the system. For this reason, it needs to be extremely adaptable. It can detect which antiviruses are running and change its methods depending on this and other programs in the device. It can also enable remote access protocols, allowing attackers to remotely control the infected computer. But Carbanak was not only undetectable and highly adaptable, but it was also a stealthy espionage tool. It monitored users' behaviors, logging keystrokes, taking screenshots, and even studying how the user connected to the internet. This allowed hackers to mimic the employee's activity and connect to the command and control server, which is the centralized system hackers use to send instructions to the infected computer. But attackers were not only using Carbanak to take control of the banking systems, they also used additional tools that expanded the malware's capabilities. Think of it like a corkscrew in the Swiss knife that also includes a can opener on the side. For example, they used a supportive tool to scan for specific banking software, alert attackers, and modify payment details. If an employee would submit a payment, the malware could quietly replace the account number, redirecting the money to the attackers. Moreover, they also used legitimate remote control software tools, additional backdoors to ensure persistence, and a range of supportive tools to penetrate systems, steal credentials, and execute remote commands. This was impressive, The attackers had managed to turn a mediocre banking malware into a multi-tool capable of espionage, lateral movement, data harvesting, and much more. However, this was not the main reason why those behind Carbanak had been successful for years. It definitely contributed, but their brilliance lay in what they did after infiltrating the systems. Carbanak quickly understood that to steal money effectively, it was not enough to design stealthy malware. You had to be stealthy yourself. So before moving any funds, they prioritized observation. They recorded employees at work to mimic their methods, studied banking manuals, and even analyzed each different banking software in depth. The goal was not to have surface-level knowledge. The goal was to understand a bank just like one of their top-level employees. Once they had the knowledge, it was time to cash out. And for this, they used different methods. One of the ways was to manipulate the SWIFT system and send money to fraudulent accounts overseas. The SWIFT system is one of the most secure networks in the world. Banks use it to communicate with each other in international transactions. It's not easy to manipulate, but Carbanak was observant and persistent, and their monitoring paid off. The recordings of employees helped them understand, step by step, what a routine transaction looked like. This ultimately allowed them to blend in their fraudulent transactions with thousands of legitimate ones. And to further cover their tracks, they always made sure to limit the amount of money stolen to $10 million per bank. This would reduce the chances of the bank's anti-fraud teams doing a full-blown investigation and uncovering their scheme. Another one of their methods was jackpotting. Hackers borrowed the Barnaby method, breaching the network of computers connected to the ATM and triggering the cash disposal. For this specific method, they established a long-lasting relationship with organized criminal groups, first Russian and then Moldovan, who supplied individuals to collect the money. These individuals are known as money mules and would coordinate with hackers on the time and place of the ATM attack. There was also a third, and perhaps more interesting method. The attackers would temporarily alter bank account balances, inflating the figures and transferring the difference to accounts overseas. For example, an account with $1,000 would have been altered to show $10,000. Then $9,000 would be transferred outside the bank. This method was also used with the money mules. Each money mule received a bank account and a credit card with a specific amount of money. For example, $3.33. Then the attackers would run a database update. This move would essentially update all accounts that had $3.33 in them, injecting all of a sudden thousands of dollars into them. Now all hackers had to do was withdraw the cash, keep some, and send the rest to Carbanak. The success of these methods was impressive. It left desperate clients with millions of losses. For instance, one bank lost over $7 million through ATM withdrawals alone, while another lost $10 million from the manipulation of its accounts. Carbanak continued cashing out from 2013 to 2015, stealing millions from banks all over the world. But the most interesting thing is that for Carbanak, this was only practice. Their ultimate goal was to refine their methods and figure out how to make more money. In 2014, Kaspersky learned about a conference in The Hague organized by Europol. They saw it as the perfect opportunity to share their investigation. Perhaps authorities could provide the missing pieces of the puzzle. And after explaining how Carbanak had spent years robbing banks undetected, plenty of people became interested, especially banking experts. Several days after the conference, researchers started receiving plenty of messages and calls. Authorities and financial institutions were sharing clues, incidents, and data related to Carbanak. However, there was a particular piece of information that seemed juicier than the rest. The Dutch police had located what they believed to be one of Carbanak's command and control servers. As we previously mentioned, a command and control server is the malware's control panel, the place where attackers send instructions to the infected computers. And if you can find it, you can disrupt the entire operation. Europol seized this command and control server and analyzed it to uncover more clues about Carbanak. They eventually discovered the source code for a botnet panel. A botnet is essentially a network of zombie computers that attackers use to infect other computers. It basically speeds up the infection process in huge infrastructures like Carbanak. Within this panel, investigators discovered a critical mistake. If an HTTP request was made to the server with a /0 at the end of the URL, it would trigger an error message. This behavior was so specific that investigators could technically scan the entire internet for systems with the same mistake, which would eventually lead them to the gang's command and control servers. This method proved successful. Most of Carbanak's infrastructure was disrupted. The thing is, these criminals are not your average cyber crooks. This was their business, their way of life. And when authorities took down their command and control, they simply adapted. Instead of relying on Carbanak, they started using other off-the-shelf tools, such as Metasploit and Cobalt Strike. And once their infrastructure was rebuilt, they returned to business as usual, targeting banks as well as focusing on transaction fraud. While hackers continued robbing banks, the investigation slowly died out. It became harder and harder to track their movements and coordinate a full takedown. Bureaucracy and legal matters also got in the way. Why? Well, imagine this. Threat actors would attack a bank in Kazakhstan via Uruguay. Then the money mules would travel to Brussels and Madrid to withdraw money from ATMs connected to that Kazakh bank. Just to investigate this case, Europol would have to coordinate with authorities from all of these countries, each requiring different documents and procedures. So whenever the joint force would get all the permissions, the attacks would be long gone. On top of that, much of its infrastructure was rented, making it even more difficult to locate them. But everything changed 2 years later, when Carbanak attempted its boldest move in history. They wanted to strike a blow that would crown them as the greatest bank robbers ever recorded. But at this point, they had grown too confident, and that confidence made them careless. They started making rookie mistakes, and even though investigations had died down, they were still being watched, and not just by Europol. In 2016, a passerby in Taipei noticed two foreigners behaving oddly near a bank ATM. One of them stood outside, constantly monitoring the street. The other lingered inside for an unusually long time. After locking eyes with the passerby, the man outside quickly went in to speak with his partner. Moments later, they both fled. Something was not right. The passerby approached the ATM. His suspicion turned out to be right. A stack of cash, about $1,000, had been left behind. Who would abandon money like that? He immediately called the police. Security footage revealed two men stashing hundreds of dollars in duffel bags. The bank confirmed over $20,000 was missing from their branch. Perhaps it was just an ATM malfunction, and a couple of low-life criminals just happened to get lucky. However, this soon proved to be much more than an ATM glitch. Over the next few days, more and more banks reported the same phenomenon. Their ATMs were spitting cash. This was no longer a standalone issue. It was a full-blown heist. Within 48 hours, attackers had breached 22 branches and 41 ATMs across Taiwan, accounting for losses of nearly $3 million. To prevent further damage, banks temporarily froze withdrawals from more than 1,000 cash machines. Citizens, already anxious due to a massive typhoon sweeping through the region, spiraled into paranoia as the media fed them with constant news about the biggest heist in Taiwan's history. Meanwhile, the police tried to hunt down the attackers, but soon realized they had almost nothing. Airport staff showed more than 20 suspicious foreigners entering and leaving the country between the 8th and 12th of July, but none carried large amounts of cash, which meant one thing: the money was still in Taiwan. However, there were no suspects, no traces, and no clear leads. And without knowing what to look for, surveillance cameras were useless. The case was suddenly paralyzed. But then, police received a call on July 11th. Taiwanese authorities got notice of a street confrontation at an ATM in Taipei. A resident had grown suspicious of a foreigner taking too long at the machine. When he looked closer, he saw what was happening. Large cash withdrawals, one after another. A money mule. He quickly called the police. The money mule noticed and tried to run away, but the resident tried to block his escape. In the end, the mule fled the scene. But on his rushed escape, he left something behind: a credit card. This single mistake changed everything. They had their first real suspect on the table: Sergei Berezovsky. He was one of the money mules who had entered the country during the first week of July. Sergei himself had left Taiwan just hours after the incident, but he had made yet another critical mistake. He had arranged for his hotel deposit to cover for friends arriving the following days. Jackpot. The police started monitoring the hotel and soon identified Sergei's friends, a couple of foreigners traveling with several suitcases. Eventually, their movements led to a locker in Taipei's train station. That's where the money was. And from there, it was over. The police followed them back to their hotel and arrested them while they were enjoying an early lunch. Around the same time, a taxi driver located another money mule who had managed to dodge surveillance cameras for days. After seeing his face on the news, he panicked and tried to run away to the countryside with the cash. The taxi driver caught him during his rushed escape, and he was eventually arrested. In the end, police recovered 90% of the stolen money and returned it to the bank. The 3 men were all sentenced to 4 to 5 years in prison. After the heist scandal died down, Taiwanese authorities started the investigation. They confiscated 41 ATMs and examined them for malware. All of them were clean, but the Taiwanese police had a hunch, so they kept digging. And eventually, they hit the jackpot. One of the ATMs had not been wiped properly and still contained traces of the Trojan. This gave the forensic team the clues they needed to trace back the attack to the First Commercial Bank, one of the largest banks in Taiwan. The attack began in late May in FCB's London branch when attackers accessed the bank's voice recording system from an IP address in Switzerland. From there, they breached the system, stole the administrator's credentials, and took control of the bank's intranet. Once inside, they infected internal servers and corrupted files related to cash dispensing and trace wiping. This would allow them to trigger the ATM withdrawals while automatically deleting digital evidence of the tampering. Then, they breached employee computers at the bank's headquarters in Taiwan. From there, they escalated privileges and gained access to something called Application Server Frameworks, the system responsible for sending updates to ATMs. With this move, attackers could not only control these systems, but also deliver their own updates to the machines. These updates would help to establish a connection between hackers' computers and the ATMs. So now, they could control the ATMs from anywhere in the world. All that money mules had to do was go to a specific location, call the attackers, and wait for the money to pour out. The Taiwan heist revealed an uncomfortable truth. Despite more than 10,000 surveillance cameras, strong coordination among authorities, and highly trained cyber professionals, the heist had only been discovered because of eyewitnesses. If the mules had been more experienced and careful, they might have escaped with millions. And if a police force as ready as the Taiwanese had been able to miss it, something was not right. So they decided to escalate the case and take its findings to Europol. And soon, they discovered Taiwan was only a small piece of a much larger story. This was the work of Carbanak, a cybercriminal organization that international authorities had been unsuccessfully hunting down for years. The thing is, due to Taiwan's diplomatic status, they had remained outside of Europol's operational network, which meant outside of Carbanak's loop. But the Taiwan heist changed everything. Europol reactivated the joint investigation and turned its attention to Taiwan. Perhaps they had been wrong all along. Perhaps the key to the entire operation did not lie so much in the infrastructure, but in the human factor of it all. In 2015, the Spanish police began tracking down a suspicious individual on the Mediterranean coast. After Europol uncovered Carbanak, authorities had been closely monitoring the region, hoping to find clues about the criminal group. During that time, they noticed a Ukrainian man with loose connections to Romanian and Moldovan organized crime gangs. This was particularly suspicious. Carbanak was known to rely on money mules from those countries. But aside from that, nothing was blatantly illegal. But a year later, Europol reached out again. Taiwanese authorities had discovered an email chain on one of the money mules' devices. One address led to a man living in Spain, Dennis K., the same man Spanish police had been keeping a watchful eye on. The case was reopened, and under close investigation, it became clear that Dennis was not acting alone. He had 3 other accomplices, and together they managed a massive criminal organization, Carbanak. Each member had a specific role. Dennis himself was in charge of designing the malware and moving laterally through banking networks. The others handled critical tasks such as creating fraudulent transactions, running phishing campaigns, and remotely controlling infected computers. Their infrastructure was carefully built and maintained using the money from the attacks. And speaking of attacks, Carbanak would get 30 to 40% of the profits, sometimes up to 50%, if they had to fly mules to specific countries. Then 10% of the profits would go to their infrastructure and another 5% to cryptocurrency exchanges, operational tools, and contractors. In the end, each core member would score 10% per attack, and that share may have been reduced due to internal disputes with mafias and questionable cryptocurrency projects. Despite these financial hiccups, Dennis accumulated around $2 million, which went straight in his pocket. The Spanish police were slowly building a case, but they still lacked legal authority. That was until attackers made yet another mistake. At the beginning of 2017, they launched an operation in Madrid, extracting around $4 million from ATMs. Although the targeted bank was not Spanish, the attack provided the grounds needed to wiretap Dennis's communications and gather the evidence needed for his arrest. A more extensive investigation revealed several interesting details. First, Dennis was laundering his money through a Bitcoin warehouse in China and had already converted most of his cash into Bitcoin. Secondly, and most importantly, he was preparing to leave Carbanak behind. He was developing Carbanak 2.0, a more sophisticated malware designed to target cryptocurrency firms. Apparently, the project was in its late stages and had already been tested at several banking institutions. Whether he believed jackpotting had become too risky or simply wanted a new challenge is unclear. But by March, it no longer mattered. The Spanish police had enough evidence to identify Dennis as the head of Carbanak, and that same month, they stormed Dennis's apartment and arrested him. They seized his laptop, retrieved around $162 million, and confiscated jewelry and 2 BMWs in his name. The head of Carbanak had fallen, and without its architect, the machine had no direction, no structure, and no future. Carbanak was the first hacking organization to turn jackpotting into a real business. Its methods were innovative for the time, especially the use of legitimate penetration testing tools like Cobalt Strike. But perhaps the most impactful thing about Carbanak is that they managed to steal $100 million worldwide, operating almost undetected for nearly 3 years. And what makes this whole scheme even more mind-blowing is that their attacks weren't technically groundbreaking. Most intrusions began with simple phishing emails and malware that exploited a couple of minor vulnerabilities. In many cases, those vulnerabilities had already been patched, and if the banks had kept up with updates, perhaps none of this would have happened. But Carbanak didn't rely on technical brilliance. It succeeded because they mastered observation and adaptation. They studied their victims, learned how banking systems worked, and replicated their patterns perfectly. This, combined with the mediocre defense systems of many banks, made Carbanak the perfect operation. Their legacy is clearly visible in several other criminal groups. For example, Metal refined ATM fraud by automating the rollback of ATM transactions. This essentially allows criminals to withdraw large amounts of cash while the balance remained unchanged. Another group, GC Man, focused on lateral movement and espionage inside corporate networks, using legitimate tools to transfer money to e-currency services. But if there is a group that took direct inspiration from Carbanak and filled its gaps on the scene, it is Fin7. In fact, their methods are so similar that researchers have linked them together, especially because Fin7 reused Carbanak's backdoor and elevated it with more sophisticated malware. The group became especially active in the United States, hacking thousands of computer systems and stealing millions of credit and debit card numbers. Then, in 2019, researchers noticed something. Carbanak's source code had been uploaded to VirusTotal, a platform used to analyze malware. This raised alarm bells and shocked many researchers. Perhaps Carbanak is not really over. Perhaps somewhere another group started refining Carbanak, making it faster, more sophisticated, and completely undetectable. Just think about it. Carbanak was a pioneer in 2013. It's been more than 10 years. The crime scene has evolved and malware is as sophisticated as ever. If its source code has indeed been refined into the ultimate Swiss Army knife, will we ever find out about the biggest cyber heist in history? Thank you for watching. Let us know if you'd like us to cover other major banking hacker groups, or perhaps look into other famous heists in history. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support is what truly helps us push through.